Hello and welcome to this Color It In coloring tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to color in this funny little crocodile. So all of the supplies that I used for this project will be linked down below. And unfortunately my camera was incredibly blurry during this part, but what I did was I took an ultra fine tip Sharpie marker and I colored in those slits of the eyes. So go ahead and do that, and then the next step is we're going to color in the sky. And I'm going to use these Noyo gel crayons, the 36 set. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some white, and there is like this minty green color in the box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a base coat of white in the background. This doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as there's enough white to mix in with your minty green color. And then once you've got that, we're going to just go ahead and start coloring the sky. Now usually I would have you do a lot of outlining, but in this case we actually really don't have to do that because we're just doing a lot of quick color mixing with this background. So instead of outlining, you see how I'm just kind of shimmying my color right up against the lines of the crocodile. So if you can do that neatly, then you don't really have to do too much outlining. But now that you've got the idea, I'm just going to quickly go ahead and speed up the video so you don't have to be too bored watching that part. And then the next step is you're going to blend the two colors together with your finger. And of course, pause the video whenever you need to catch up, because I know the video is making it look like it's going really fast. And go ahead and clean off your fingers. And normally the next step would be to color the water area, but I'm going to show you how to do reflections later. So we're going to move on to the top of the crocodile's head. So I'm going to choose a medium green color, medium meaning there is one more that's much darker, which is like kind of like the foresty green. So what I'm going to do here is, yes, we are going to do some outlining first because we do want to make sure that the crocodile stays nice and neat. And notice I smoothed off the crumbs from the gel crayon, and I'm just going to choose the very edge to stay nice and clean as I do my outlining. Okay, now that I've got everything outlined, I'm going to go ahead and color in the crocodile's head, keeping my strokes close together. And once I get up to the eye, I'm going to blend it out with my finger just so that my colors don't dry out before I have a chance to blend the whole thing. And now I'm just going to do all the rest of the crocodile's head, color it in, and blend. Now I'm going to move on to the darkest green, which is that foresty green color, and I'm just going to do a little bit of shading. So we want to make sure that we can see the difference between the back eye and the back of the head there. So I'm going to just throw in some of that dark green at the bottom of that back eye and gently blend it into the rest of the green. And then for the back of the head, you'll be able to still see where that curve happens at the top there. And this is where I'm just going to throw in some of that dark green and blend it into the rest of the green, making sure that my hand does not go into the head. But you see how we defined the head from the neck a little bit better there. Now I'm going to move on to this bright green. It's the brightest green in the box. And this is what we're going to use to color the bottom half of the crocodile's head. So just be careful in here because this is a much smaller space. And just be as careful as you can around those teeth. So here I'm making sure to do some outlining just to make sure I don't go past the edges there. And here I am going to finish up my outlining and my coloring, and then I'm going to blend it with my finger. Oh, but got to make sure that your fingers are clean first because you don't want any of that super dark green to mess up the bright green. Now I'm going back to that medium green color, the same color as the majority of the croc's head. And I'm going to add some rings in here. So from the center of that curve, and then in front of the tooth, and then just one in between those two teeth. And here I'm going to just curve it up to each of those points in the middle of that curve, and then from that point up, and then I can put two more in there. And notice that I didn't overcrowd, they're not too close together. And my lines looked a little bit grainy, so I'm just lightly blending them a little bit here. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the light blue, and I'm going to put my first coat of this water in there. Now here you can actually skip all of this outlining that you see me doing, because I ended up just doing that same technique that I did for the sky, which is just kind of shimmying that blue up to the croc's head there. And make sure you keep your lines as horizontal as possible so that it looks like it's moving water. And notice I left a little bit of the paper showing through, and that's because we're going to be doing a lot of layering here. So the next layer is we're going to put the reflection in the water. So let's go back to that bright green. And I'm basically just going to color in the mirror image of that green part, but it's not going to be perfect. Again, you see how I'm just doing that shimmying motion, because the water would have been breaking up a perfect reflection, right? So I'm still allowing a little bit of the blue underneath to show through. So now we're back to that medium green color, and I'm just going to lightly outline the bottom of the head just so we can see the separation of the head from the water a little bit more clearly. And now I'm going to lightly add in the reflections of the rings in there. And now I'm going to go in with that dark foresty green because I want this to look a little bit more swampy. So here is another layer that we're adding on top of the blue, but do this very, very lightly because this is a very dark green, and we're still going to do some more reflections with that color later on, and you'll see what I mean later. But for now, very lightly shimmy it in, allow some of that blue underneath to show through. And then go ahead and blend it in. And remember, keep all of your strokes as horizontal as you possibly can, so it looks like water moving through realistically. And it might look a little bit grainy to you, so I went in with a Filbert number 12 brush, but since I'm only working with paper, I swiped most of the water off on the edge of the cup because I only need the brush to be slightly moist. And you see how by doing that, it blends those Noyo gel crayons really well together, because those gel crayons are actually watercolor crayons. So the water is activating them. Isn't that so cool? I love those crayons because they behave, they look like an oil pastel, but yeah, they work with water. Alright, so just finishing up these last little touches, smoothing everything out. Again, don't go crazy with the water. Your brush just barely needs a little bit. And I lost my rings a little bit, so I'm going to try to bring some of those back because I like the way they show through the water. But now it looks a little too harsh, so now I'm just going to carefully blend them with my pinky. There we go. Okay, now we're going to add some more background to our scene. We're really going to make this look swampy. So I'm going to add some tall blades of grass. So notice I'm starting at the bottom and I'm just flicking my way up. And you want a variety of heights because out in the swamp, you know, no one's mowing the lawn. So they'd be kind of growing crazy all over the place. So I'm just going to fill in a little bit of those in-betweens. But now I'm going to switch to the brighter green to add a little bit more dimension to those blades of grass. So we did the low lights, now we're sort of doing like the highlights. This also helps it to look a little bit more full in the background. It just adds more visual interest. Here is where we're going to add some more reflections in the water. So we're going to repeat the same process, but in the opposite direction to make it look like those blades of grass really are reflecting in the water. So starting off with that dark foresty green. Make sure they're nice and long. Now going back in with the bright green. And mine looked a little bit too grainy, so I'm going to go in with my Filbert number 6 brush. You could use the other size brush too, but I like this one because it's a little bit smaller of a tip there. And I'm just going to wet those blades of grass to sort of get rid of some of that graininess. And you see how I turned the brush over so that I'm really just using the side edge of it, and that's going to help me to right there, the side edge, and just pulling up like that, and I'm releasing my pressure as I move up. That's what's going to help to get those tapered blades of grass so that they don't look too chunky, and it'll just help them to look a little bit more realistic. And we'll also smooth out the reflections. Okay, next up we're going to move on to the eyes, and I just pulled out the brightest yellow from the box, and we're just going to carefully fill in both of the eyes. And this next part is kind of optional, but it's fun. I'm going in with the bright green, just hugging the black slits. It ended up not showing up too much on camera, so if you want, maybe you could switch to the medium green so it shows up a lot better. But you'll also notice that it got into the black of the eye a little bit, so I'm going in with my opened up paper clip and I'm just scraping out those extra bits that I don't want in there. And to smooth it out, I just felt like my fingers were just going to be too fat, so that's why I switched to my number 6 Filbert brush to blend the two colors together. But this is where it sort of disappeared a little bit, which is why I'd say if you want to do that part, go with that darker green. Although it still ended up looking pretty cool. All right, now let's not forget about his little nostril. Going back to that dark forest green. Let's just go ahead and fill it in. And we're going to add some final touches with some details. I'm going in with this white craft paint. I use folk art because it's really opaque, meaning it's not very see-through. And I'm also going to go back to my Filbert number 6 brush. And I'm just going to pull the edge of the paint with my brush so it's not too gloppy. And I'm going to use the very edge, just like we did for the blades, so not like that, but like this. You see how I turned it? And I'm going to add a thin line. This is going to be the water line that tells us it's the separation between the actual ground and the water. And here I'm just adding in some white water lines. Make sure that you stay as horizontal as possible, meaning don't dip down at an angle, or else it won't really look like realistic water moving. And don't ignore your reflection. Actually go ahead over your reflection as well, because that's part of the water. Here I'm just doing it very lightly. You're not pressing too hard with this. That's how you get those thin lines. All right, now I'm going to clean off my brush, but do you see what I mean? Like when you put those white water lines, it really makes it look like those reflections are deep in the water. So for the white sparkle in the eyes, you can either use an opened up paper clip or the back of your brush, but I just want tiny little dots, so I'm going to use my paper clip. I'm going to dip it in, and it's just a quick little boop, boop on each eye in the same pattern. There we go. All right, so I'm going to clean up my mess. I hate to waste paint, so I'm going to put some of my paint back into its container. And one of the final touches that I'm going to add are some flies. To me, I think adding flies just sort of makes it look even more swampy, like it's just dirty out there. And I'm going to put 3. And if you do this, don't overcrowd your sky with these. Just about 3 spaced out will do. Now this next part is completely optional. You can call it done right here, but I decided to add some scaly texture to my crocodile. And what I did was I just kind of made them look like little mountain tops to express the ridges. So you might want to watch to see until the end whether or not you like this effect. So again, you're not overcrowding. Make sure they're well spaced if you do this. Then to add some highlights, I went in with my paper clip and I scraped out the top of each little scale mark. Although when you do that, sometimes it ends up revealing just the same green behind it. So you might want to do this a little bit more in the middle so that you see a little bit of that dark above the scraped out line, if that makes sense. I'm not even sure if you can really see it on camera, but in person it does look like little highlights, and it just adds to the texture of those scales. Ta-da! Well, there we go. We are done with this amazing picture. I hope you had fun. You learned how to add some reflections, and we used a little bit of paint. So hopefully you will join me for the next one. Bye!